Hi, my name is Phil, and my wife Amy and I are building a Chesapeake Light Craft Teardrop Camper. At the end of this video, I'll show you a little about what we've been working on since we've moved here to... Before we start, I had some epoxy that was a bit sloppy and ended up on a finished part of the camper. But the reason why it's interesting is it shows what happens when you put epoxy on top of cured epoxy without sanding first. It just peels off. In a previous video, I covered installing the hinges. When I installed the hinges, I clamped everything so it would be a nice tight fit. Then, because of the addition of epoxy fillets, and so on, I was able to make slight adjustments to the opening by just rasping and sanding out a little material between the hinges. I also had to rasp away a blob of thickened epoxy that got in the way of one of the hinges. You remember installing the fairlead bosses? One of the more fiddly bits to installing the doors is to get those doodads that guide and also capture the door latch rods, also called fairleads, installed just right so the door closes against the seal and sits flush with the side of the camper. Too tight and you'll have trouble closing the door. Too loose and the door will stick out from the side of the camper and might leak in the rain. CLC has you adjust the position of the fairleads by adding washers as shims. There isn't much room for error here, so some folks have told me they find this to be the hardest part, and their doors don't close perfectly. Speaking of rods, the rods that come with the camper are way too long and you need to cut them. I marked them by wrapping them with blue tape and marking the line with a Sharpie. I put a metal cutting blade on my small circular saw and cut them. I intentionally left them a little long and later I ground them shorter. I also found it helpful to round off the ends so that they would slide in and out of the fairleads fixed to the door frame. There are 4 rods, 2 upper and 2 lower, that go into the camper. The ends of 2 of them need to be bent at an angle. My old welding table that I use for my MIDI lathe was a perfect stiff surface to clamp to for bending, and I set my angle gauge to use as a guide. That worked out perfectly. CLC provides some screws to act as hinge pins, and in order to prevent the threads from gouging out the holes in the hinges, they instruct you to put heat shrink around the screw. If you've done electronics work before, you might have used heat shrink. It comes as this cool little tube that shrinks as you heat it. There are different types. Some get harder as they shrink and others stay soft and flexible. The stuff they provide is the latter. Recently, I was asked how to deal with the slop or looseness in door hinges causing sag. We didn't seem to have this problem, but others have solved it in various ways. Gary Kushner used some nylon bushings he found at his local Ace Hardware. Great idea, Gary. If the hinges start to sag on our camper, I think I would consider one other option, which is to refill the holes with epoxy and drill them a little bit smaller. Then I would turn the whole assembly into a long hinge by using a brass rod tapped with threads at each end. I might think about inserting a brass or nylon bushing as well, since Gary says he's happy with the results. The inside door handle sits on a square rod that goes through the door and is secured to the rod by a grub screw. I recommend using some blue Loctite to stop the grub screw from backing out. I found both the left and the right door handle grub screws sitting inside the camper on the first couple of outings, and we've been lucky they didn't fall out onto the ground somewhere. I used quite a lot of silicone sealant while installing the door hardware. Pay attention to the manual and you won't have to take stuff apart. It's a pretty good idea to test fit everything and make sure you understand how it goes together before you start using that goop. With all that silicone sealant, taking stuff apart is kind of a pain. Once we got settled in, we took the camper out for a trial run. It was a great experience, but we did find that on a cold night we had quite a bit of condensation all over the inside of the camper. So we installed the insulation. Amy ran the insulation through a router set up with a 1/2-inch roundover bit, then we started gluing it to the camper. CLC recommends that you do a dry fit before installing the foam and making any adjustments before gluing. When you put the contact cement onto the camper and the insulation, you pretty much have to get it right the first time. We put contact cement on both surfaces, counted to 20, and Amy stuck the pieces in place. It looks pretty good in just charcoal gray, but a couple of young men in the area recently completed their camper, and they put a nice cream-colored headliner fabric over the foam, and the inside of their camper looks nice and airy.
Yeah, with the little railing feature to separate the colors.
Yeah, so what was that made out of? Parts of the cradle, or what was that made out of?
No, that was actually, they sent us a damaged galley flat.
Oh, okay.
They also used some spare wood to add an attractive touch of trim to the inside. I finished the electronics. I apologize if you were hoping for a tutorial on that, but I pictured someone following my advice and later driving down the road towing a camper on fire. Plus, electronics seems to be the most customized part of the camper other than adding graphics or decorations. My opinion is the products made for small boats are well suited to campers. If you have some specific questions about installing the electrical stuff, please feel free to reach out.
Well, that's new.
Back in March, we bought a house that needed quite a lot of work. This is what we've been working on. If you enjoyed this video, or even if you're my sister and you've been waiting for the credits to see if you finally get a mention, please like and subscribe. And don't forget to click on the bell next to the word subscribe so you get notified when I upload another video. Thanks for watching.